Do you not perceive from this statement the fatal consequences that would result from the facilities given by Holland to the English for the introduction of their goods on the continent? They would enable England to levy upon us the subsidies which she would afterwards offer to other powers to fight against us. Your Majesty is as much interested as I am to guard against the crafty policy of the English cabinet. A few years more and England will wish for peace as much as we do. Observe the situation of your kingdom, and you will see that the system I allude to is more useful to yourself than it is to me. Holland is a maritime and commercial power. She possesses fine seaports, fleets, sailors, skillful commanders, and colonies which do not cost anything to the mother country, and her inhabitants understand trade as well as the English. Has not Holland, therefore, an interest in defending all those advantages? May not peace restore her to the station she formerly held? Granted that her situation may be painful for a few years, but it is not this preferable to making the King of Holland a mere governor for England, and Holland and her colonies a vassal of Great Britain. Yet the protection which you would afford to English commerce would lead to that result. The examples of Sicily and Portugal are still before your eyes. Await the result of the progress of time. You want to sell your gins, and England wants to buy them. Point out the place where the English smugglers may come and fetch them, but let them pay for them in money and never in goods. Positively never. Peace must at last be made, and you will then make a treaty of commerce with England. I may perhaps also make one with her, but in which our mutual interest shall be reciprocally guaranteed. If we must allow England to exercise a kind of supremacy on the sea, a supremacy which she will have purchased at the expense of her treasures and of her blood, and which is the natural consequence of her geographical position and of her possessions in the 3 other parts of the globe, at least our flags will be at liberty to appear on the ocean without being exposed to insult, and our maritime trade will cease to be ruinous. For the present, we must direct our efforts towards preventing England from interfering in the affairs of the continent. I have been led on from the consideration of the mercy which you have granted to the above details, and I have entered into them because I feared that you Dutch ministers may impress your Majesty's mind with false notions. I wish you to reflect seriously upon the contents of this letter and to render the different subjects it treats upon objects of the deliberations of your councils, in order that your ministers may give a proper direction and tendency to their measures. Under no pretense whatever will France allow Holland to separate herself from the continental system. With respect to these smugglers, since the fault has been committed, it cannot be undone. I advise you, however, not to leave them in the prisons of Middelburg. It is too near the spot where the crime was perpetuated. Send them to the remotest part of Holland, the present having no other object. Napoleon. During the dinner, the emperor asked his groom how his horse was. The groom answered that it was well fed, in good spirits, and in excellent condition. I hope he does not complain of me, said the emperor. If ever a horse led the life of a chanoine, it is assuredly this one. It is now 2 or 3 months since the emperor rode on horseback, the 25th through the 27th. The emperor, for some days past, has been remarkably assiduous in his application. All our mornings have been spent in making researches respecting Egypt and the works of the ancient authors. We have looked over Herodotus, Pliny, Strabo, together without any other intermission than that which we require to eat our breakfast, which was served on his small table. The weather continued bad, and the emperor dictated every day and the whole day. At dinner, he told us he found himself much better. We then observed to him that for some time past, however, he did not go out of the house and was occupied 8, 10, or 12 hours of the day. That is the very reason of my being better, said he. Occupation is my element. I am born and made for it. I have found the limits beyond which I could not use my legs. I have seen the extent to which I could use my eyes, but I never have known any bounds to my capability of application. I nearly killed poor Meneval. I was obliged to relieve him for a time from the duties of his situation and place him for the recovery of his health near the person of Maria Louisa, where his post was a mere sinecure. The emperor added that if he were in Europe and had leisure, his pleasure would be to write history. He complained of the very indifferent manner in which history was written everywhere. The researches he had lately been engaged in had proved this fact to him to a degree beyond anything he could have ever suspected. "We have no good history," observed he, "and we could not have any. And the other nations of Europe were nearly in the same predicament as ourselves. Monks and privileged individuals, that is, men friendly to abuses and inimical to information and learning, had monopolized this branch of writing. They had told us what they thought proper, or rather that which favored their interests, gratified their passions, or agreed with their own views. He had formed, he said, a plan for remedying the evil as much as possible. He intended, for instance, to appoint commissions from the Institute, or learned men whom public opinion might have pointed out to him, to revise, criticize, and republish our historical annals. He wished also to add commentaries to the classic authors which are put in the hands of our youth, to explain them in reference to our modern institutions. With a good program, competition, and rewards, this end would have been accomplished. Everything can be obtained by such means." He then repeated what I believe I have mentioned before, that it had been his intention to cause the history of the last reigns of our kings to be written from the original documents taken from the archives of our foreign affairs. There were also several manuscripts, both ancient and modern, in the Imperial Library, which he intended to have printed, classifying and embodying them under their different heads, so as to form codes of doctrines on science, morality, literature, fine arts, etc. He had, he said, several other plans of a similar nature. And could any other period be found equally favorable to the execution of such plans? When will there be again united in the same man the genius to conceive and the power to execute them, in order to check the production of the immense number of inferior works with which the public was inundated, without, however, trenching upon the liberty of the press? He asked what objection there could have been to the formation of a tribunal of opinion composed of members of the Institute, of members of the University, and of persons appointed by the government, who would have examined all works with reference to these three points of view: science, morality, and politics. Who would have criticized them and defined the degree of merit possessed by each? This tribunal would have been the light of the public. It would have operated as a warranty in favor of works of real merit, would have ensured their success, and thus produced emulation, whilst, on the contrary, it would necessarily have discouraged the publication of inferior productions. All our evenings were devoted to the Odyssey, with which we are delighted. Polyphemus, Tiresias, and the Sirens have quite charmed us. The following details relate to Monsieur Meneval, to whom the emperor alluded above. They will be considered invaluable, as they will serve to exhibit Napoleon in the sphere of his private life. The emperor, when first consul, complained that he had no secretary. He had just dismissed the one he had during the campaigns of Italy and the expedition in Egypt. He was an old college acquaintance of the emperor, a man full of intelligence, and to whom he was very much attached, but he had been obliged to part with him. His brother Joseph then offered him his own secretary, whom he had only had for a short time. Napoleon accepted the offer and acquired a treasure. This the emperor has repeated several times since. It was Meneval, whom he has since made a baron, maitre de requête, and secrétaire de commandement of the Empress Maria Louisa. Meneval's title, when attached to the first consul, was secretary of the portfolio. A long regulation was even made expressly regarding him, the principal article of which was that he should never, under any pretense whatever, have a secretary nor employ a scribe, which condition was strictly observed. Monsieur Meneval was a man of gentle and reserved manners, very discreet, working at all times and at all hours hours. The emperor never had reason to be dissatisfied or displeased with him and was very much attached to him. The secretary of the portfolio had generally all the current business, all affairs that arose on a sudden emergency or from a sudden thought. How many affairs, plans, and conceptions have been discussed and transmitted through his medium? He opened and read all letters addressed to the emperor, classed them for the emperor's examination, and wrote under his dictation. The emperor dictated so fast that most frequently, in order to save time, the secretary was obliged to endeavor to recollect the words rather than attempt to write them down at the moment they were pronounced. In this Meneval particularly excelled. In course of time, Meneval was authorized himself to return an answer on many subjects. He might easily have acquired great influence, but it was quite contrary to his inclination to seek to obtain it. The emperor was almost always in his closet. It might be said that he spent the whole day and part of the night in it. He usually went to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock and got up again about 12 to work for a few hours more. Sometimes he sent for Monsieur Meneval, but most frequently he did not, and aware of his zeal, he would sometimes say to him, "You must not kill yourself." When the emperor went into his closet in the morning, he found bundles of paper already arranged and prepared for him by Meneval, who had been there before him. If the emperor sometimes allowed 24 hours or 2 days to elapse without going into it, his secretary would remind him of it and tell him that he would suffer himself to be overwhelmed with the mass of papers that were accumulating and that the closet would soon be full of them. To this the emperor usually answered good-humoredly, "Do not alarm yourself. It will soon be cleared." And so indeed it was. For in a few hours the emperor had dispatched all the answers and was even with the current business. It is true that he got through a great deal by not answering many things and throwing away all that he considered useless, even when coming from his ministers. To this they were accustomed, and when they saw no answer appeared, they knew what it meant. He himself read all letters that were addressed to him. To some he answered by writing a few words in the margin, and to others he dictated an answer. Those that were of great importance were always put by and read a second time, were never answered until some time had elapsed. When leaving his closet, he generally recapitulated those affairs that were of greatest consequence and fixed the hour at which they must be ready for him, which was always punctually attended to. If at that hour the emperor did not come, Monsieur Meneval followed him about from place to place through the palace several times to remind him of it. On some of these occasions, the emperor would go and settle the affair. At other times, he would say, "Tomorrow night is a good advisor." This was his usual phrase, and he often said that he had indeed worked much more at night than during the day. Not that thoughts of business prevented him from sleeping, but because he slept at intervals according as he wanted rest, and a little sufficed for him. It often happened to the emperor in the course of his campaigns to be roused suddenly upon some emergency of business. He would then immediately get up, and it would have been impossible to guess from the appearance of his eyes that he had just been sleeping. He then gave his decision or dictated his answer with as much clearness and with his mind as free and unembarrassed as at any other moment. This he called the after-midnight presence of mind, and he possessed it in a most extraordinary degree. It has sometimes happened that he has been perhaps called up as often as 10 times in the same night, and each time he was always found to have fallen asleep again, not having as yet taken his quantum of rest, boasting one day to one of his ministers, General Clark, of the faculty which he possessed of sleeping, almost at pleasure, and how little rest you required. Clark answered in a jocular tone, "Yes, sire, and that is a source of torment to us, for it is often at our expense. We feel our share of it sometimes." The emperor did everything himself, and through the medium of his closet he appointed to all vacant situations, and most frequently situated new names to those of the persons proposed to him. He read the plans of his ministers, adopted, rejected, or modified them. He even indicted the notes of the Minister for Foreign Affairs, which he dictated to Meneval, from whom he kept them secret. It was through Meneval also that he wrote to the different sovereigns, in addressing whom he observed a formula which he had drawn up from the protocols of former times, and to the strict observance of which he attached great importance. All the ministers transacted business with the emperor together on one day of the week appointed for that purpose, unless something occurred to prevent it. The business of each minister was transacted in the presence of all others, who were allowed to give their opinion respecting it, and each of them thus emptied his portfolio. A register was kept of the deliberations, of which there must be many volumes. These documents that had been decided on were left to have the signature affixed to them, which was done through the medium of the Minister Secretary of State, who countersigned them. Sometimes some of these papers, after they had been thus decided on, were still sent to the Emperor's closet to be revised and modified before the signature was put to them. The Minister for Foreign Affairs was the only one who, independently of his share in the general business transacted by the other ministers, had, beside from the secret nature of his functions, other duties to dispatch in private with the emperor. One of the favorite aides-de-camp of the emperor was entrusted with that branch of the administration of war called the personnel, which embraces everything relating to the soldiers personally. Duroc occupied for a long time this confidential post. Afterwards, Bertrand and Lauriston, Count Aubin was the last to fill it. Mr. Meneval, being in a very different state of health, worn down by fatigue of application, and requiring some interval of repose, the emperor gave him a situation in the household of Empress Maria Louisa, which was, he said, quite a sinecure. However, the emperor only parted with him on condition that he should come back to him as soon as he was well, and he never failed to remind him of it every time he saw him. After Meneval's retirement, the business of the emperor's closet ceased to be conducted by one person only. Meneval had a great many successors at the same moment, and the closet became a kind of office in which several persons were employed. One of these persons, whom the emperor had taken on the recommendation of others who had thought they could answer for him as for themselves, received an order at the time of the disasters of 1814 to burn the documents that were in the closet. But instead of obeying this order, he so far forgot his duty as to take them away with him. And after the king's restoration, he wrote to one of his ministers to offer them to him. The emperor found the proof of his treachery among the papers left at the Tuileries at the period of the 20th of March. And one morning, having gone into his closet before anybody was come, he wrote several times on a piece of paper, as if he had been trying his pen, "Such a one is a traitor, such a one is a traitor," and laid it on the table where sat one of those who had recommended him, and who was himself, said the emperor, a man on whose zeal and fidelity every reliance could be placed. This was the only reproach he ever addressed to him, and the only vengeance he ever exercised on the offender. Several traces may therefore be found, and several documents must exist, of the business transacted in the emperor's closet. Some of these documents have been alluded to in the debates of the British Parliament, but Napoleon solemnly declared on his return at the period of the 20th of March last that these documents had been falsified, and they are not the only documents that are left in that ever memorable administration. There must be 20 or 30 folio volumes, and as many in quarto, containing the correspondence of the campaigns of Italy and of Egypt, collected and regularly classed. There must be also about 60 or 80 folio volumes of the deliberations of the Council of Ministers, collected by the Secretaries of State, the Duke of Bassano and Count de Roux, and lastly the minutes of the sittings of the Council of State, written and arranged by Monsieur Lecraye. These are real and proud titles of glory for Napoleon. Upon these immortal monuments, all subsequent governments have modeled and directed their administrations, and from them all future governments of every country will henceforth inevitably seek and derive information. So sure and solid have been the foundations which he has laid, so judiciously placed the landmarks, so deeply laid in the roots. So much in one word does the whole bear the stamp of genius and the character of rectitude and of duration.